Hello, Adam.
Morning, how are you doing?
Good morning.
Morning.
So, welcome to the Green Finance Forum. This will be the first of a number that will run over the next 12 months and beyond. And we're the Green series that we're launching. We've decided to clearly launch it with the beginning of COP on the 1st of November. So this discussion will appear as a central part of that, because green finance is going to be a critical part of all the whole development. In fact, nothing will be possible unless strategies are in place to do so. So in terms of what we're actually going to do, you have the questions. Unfortunately, Nick from the Carbon Trust has unavoidably is unable to make the meeting today. However, he will be making a contribution in terms of an article that he's going to write about the green bonds that local government are announcing. In terms of the rest of the report, and I'm Alistair Nimmo from CityM, so I'll be invigilating the discussion. It will be sitting in a bed of topics around local authorities, because local authorities are going to be critical to making this work, because they hold all the levers of things like planning permission, etc. So we've got wonderful stories from the likes of Manchester. Indeed, we've got an interview with Andy Burnham, the mayor of Manchester, and other luminaries from the local government world. So the discussion will take roughly about 45 minutes to 50 minutes. We wanted a kind of smaller group, because I think these are pretty in-depth questions, and I think it's important that they're aired properly. So this gentleman in the centre, my colleague Stuart Dewar, who's our kind of technical person for today's discussion, and Stuart will be recording it, and our kind of complete version will be available on YouTube. But a kind of edited version will appear on the CityM website, and we may actually cut and splice it in terms of other articles. A journalist will then write this up so that we actually have a text version, and we will share it with you ahead of it actually going live. Just to make sure that you're happy with the content, and everything that was said was as you wished. So without further ado, if I could address the first question to James. How will the global drive for greener economies impact on the finance sector, and is the UK ready?
Well, I mean, it's going to be a massive change that we're going to see across the world. And I think that one of the exciting things about COP26 that we're starting to see is just this global sort of consensus that taking action on climate change is now essential. We saw the IPCC report talking about the urgency of it. We've seen the International Energy Agency, formerly the kind of bastion of the oil and gas majors, now saying about we can't have more investment in fossil fuels. This is absolutely an agenda that the world is now embracing. And I think that is a really exciting moment. And I think that people will look back on this year as being one of the kind of key inflection points where we as a global community started to realize that tackling climate change is something that's absolutely essential, that all of our efforts need to go into. And so I think, we are definitely heading towards a greener economy. We've seen the UK government publish its own net zero strategy now, which is talking about all different areas of our lives and how they're going to be impacted by the drive to net zero. So whether that's transport or heating, or even as far as considerations perhaps of what we might be eating in a net zero world. These are all really important components of understanding what that economy looks like. And I think it's really important that government is now setting out its views and driving its stall forwards on what it thinks around this, because investors very much follow the cues that they receive from the world around them, and of course government being a key part of that. And so, I think that drive to a greener economy is well underway, both here in the UK and across the world. And so, of course, we've got to then think about, well, how do we pay for that? And clearly that doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen easily. And I think that's where a big part of the conversation is now around financial services. And so there's two sides to this piece. There's kind of financing the green, which is how do we figure out how to pay for all of these things like electric vehicle charging points and electric transport fleets and heating upgrades in every home in the land. And then on the other side, there's the greening of finance. And so that's thinking about, well, how do we change the way that finance looks and feels and thinks about the world? And I'm pleased to say that on both of those pieces, there's a huge amount of work underway. And I think the positive thing is that the UK is in a strong position to become, and remain in its kind of forefront position globally on financial services. And so what we're seeing is, infrastructure investors looking at, going into real detail about what some of the new opportunities might be. We're seeing investment managers thinking about, well, how can they make their funds more sustainable? Actually sustainable in the broader sense, not just environmentally sustainable, but sustainable on social and other issues. So yeah, I think there is a huge amount of work going on, and the financial sector is ready to play its part. But I think one key caution here is that we can't expect financial services to solve this problem on its own. This has to be an absolute team game where everybody must be working together to address these issues.
Excellent. We've been joined by Seb. Hello, Seb. Welcome.
Hello.
Welcome to the panel. James has been talking about the global drive for green economies and how it's going to impact the UK, and is the UK ready? These solutions, Adam, should they be at a global or a UK level, or a mixture of both, given local and global circumstances?
Yeah, I think echoing what James has said, it needs to be both, to be honest with you, Alistair. The urgency and the pressing nature of what needs to be achieved here isn't going to be solved simply by us in the UK focusing solely on the UK. You need to look at this on a global scale. I think as investment managers, it's important that we look wider as well on how we can drive positive impact, and that needs to be coupled with local real asset schemes, infrastructure schemes that have a tangible benefit for people in the local economy as well. And I think the banking side of things is extremely important as well. We need to make sure that whilst we are not directly investing in anything that's having a negative impact and providing solutions, we also need to make sure that actually the retail banks are playing their part, because the amount of capital that they have that's being deployed in the forms of loan books, etc., to finance sectors with a negative impact is causing a major problem, and that needs to be resolved as well. So yeah, it's both channels. It can't just be one.
And Seb, in terms of the global appetite for investors, will that help drive the global economy green?
Well, the global appetite, for investment in green solutions.
Yes.
Well, I mean, it's one part of the puzzle, isn't it? That we need, investors to deploy capital into these technologies. It's a critical piece, but it's a systemic problem. So we need all parts of society to be pushing or pulling in the same direction. I think investors, in many cases, investors are ahead of regulators, ahead of government, ahead of society generally on a lot of these issues. So I think there is a particular leadership role that finance can play, but we need everyone to be pulling in the same direction.
I mean, I think you're right on that, Seb. And can I just say, I think the interesting thing here is that the investors are ahead of the game on this, but there's still a huge amount of skepticism in the market around what is actually green and ethical investing. You know, a lot of the surveys that have been done recently in conjunction with Good Money Week have found that, you know, 7 out of 10 investors do want to invest in a more sustainable manner, but the percentage is almost the same of those that actually doubt the green credentials of those investments. So, you know, being the transparency element and some form of, you know, clear explanations for clients, and especially on the retail side of things, needs to be in place before, you know, this can really drive forward properly.
That greenwashing point, Adam, is a really important one, and you know, I'm glad you mentioned the research that, you know, so for the last since 2009, UK CIF has been doing research for Good Money Week, looking at how attitudes have changed in relation to people's views on where they want their money to be. And there's been a huge decline in the number of people that say they only want to invest just to make money, and that's the sole purpose of their investments. And I think that's something quite positive. What that's also, though, led to is a big increase in the number of people that answer that question by saying, I don't know. And I think that is something we need to dig into as an industry. I think also there's the other piece, which is that there is, you know, documented through polling evidence, a lack of trust in financial services in relation to, are we doing what we say we're doing? You know, and is the green credentials of a fund or a product more been written by the marketing department than it has actually been written by the people making the day-to-day decisions of where that money is invested? And that's a really important question. And what it actually does, our view, is that greenwashing harms the leaders. It harms people, you know, like on this call today, who are absolutely driving things forward in a really positive way. Because first of all, it ties everyone with the same brush, but also it means that people are not able to truly look at those people like Seb and Adam, what you're doing, putting more resources, more money, more time into thinking about how to make your fund greener and actually walking the talk, versus someone else who's just done it as a marketing gimmick. And I think that's something we really need to address. And I think we would actually look to government to support some changes in regulation to really enhance the work being done to tackle greenwashing.
And so Deloitte are you know, a global enterprise with a myriad of different kinds of clients, including financial ones across the world. Where do you see the global drive coming from? Is there particular sectors? Is there an opportunity for the traditionally innovative UK financial sector to excel as it has with fintech?
I think that you will definitely see some of the more innovative institutions pushing ahead with this more than others. But as Adam and James have talked about, there's a real incentivization coming from investors to get this right. So, you know, financial institutions really do need to be clear about what their sustainable investment credentials are, and you know, have that sort of taxonomy, which we'll come on to later, that demonstrates that what they're investing in is genuine and real. So just to create that trust in the market. I mean, the other thing I suppose I would add is I think there'll become more of a norm that financial institutions and some of the bigger retail lenders and high street lenders are going to start asking for borrowers to make green commitments just as in the normal course of business, because I think that's the profile of this sector and the market is just growing exponentially. And within a couple of years, I think this is going to be much more of a norm that we're seeing some of the big institutions, you know, that's just something that's expected of them, and they will need to demonstrate that that's part of their normal course of business. So I think we'll see more of those kind of commitments as part of terms of normal business lending.
And Seb, do you think we're likely to see disruptors emerging in the green sector as we have with fintech, or will it be policed and driven by the existing array of organizations?
I mean, we're already some way down this road. I don't think it's all in the future. I mean, if you look at the the energy, the power generation sector, it's already been massively disrupted. I mean, it's an entirely different sector to what it was 10, 20 years ago. The same is happening with electric vehicles. It's not in the future, it's happening already. Tesla's top 10 most valuable companies on the planet, and it only produces electric vehicles. So that disruption story is not something that's just in the future. It's already well underway, but it's still in the early stages. When you look at across the economy as the whole, we've had a lot of discussion recently in the UK about heat pumps. Heat pumps are the standard technology in other countries, but in the UK they're not. So it'll be disruptive in the UK, but it's an established technology in Sweden and parts of Northern Europe already. So it's not. The technology itself is well known, but its impact on different markets is perhaps, will still be disruptive. And then, of course, there are sectors that still have yet to be properly disrupted. We talk a lot about fast fashion. You can see the start of that already happening with, some more circular business models, people reselling clothing. There are other sectors, particularly in agriculture, where you can see the shape of the future. There are the businesses that are now producing, plant-based proteins as alternatives to meats, cellular agriculture. These things exist, at scale in some places. So I don't think we should, and maybe you didn't mean the question this way, but it's not all about, small little startup businesses in the future. This is with us already. But it's, but we are still in the first the first quarter of the game, perhaps you could say. But it's not something that's in the future. It's with us today.
And Adam, Triodos, this is an area, certainly with sustainability, that you have traditionally occupied. Are you seeing a growing opportunity in terms of investment toward green products?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess for the last 40 years, we've been doing, impact investing. We do it across the listed side, so the stock markets, listed bonds, and through to the private markets as well. And Seb's spot on. We're not talking about things in the future. This is happening now. If you look at the listed side, the future-proof companies, the leaders, the impact leaders are there already, and they're growing in size and value. If you look at the private market side, the pipeline of, investment opportunity into renewables, emerging market and developed, as well as food and ag, is huge. Yeah, absolutely huge. We are approached on a regular basis with opportunity. So it's extremely exciting, and there's a lot happening, which is really positive, and that's what we need as well.
Thank you, Adam. One area that some of the investments that are going to be required are going to be absolutely eye-watering, and some of the numbers that have been quoted over the past few days, with regards to the heat pumps, etc., in terms of turning every home in the UK into, to have that facility is simply quite eye-watering. So there's a role of some kind of national infrastructure bank would seem to be a kind of sensible way of going down that road in order to facilitate this happening. James, what's your view on what potential role as a national infrastructure bank could have?
So yeah, I guess great question. I think the key thing is that this is being set up as we speak. The Chancellor announced it, I think, a couple of years ago that it was going to be created, and we worked really, really hard with a group of other like-minded organizations to push for it to have a net zero mandate, and we were successful in that campaign. And so the bank has a dual mandate. One half is net zero, the other half is leveling up, which obviously is a really key part of this government's agenda and a very important social policy. And so this bank is being created. I think it's really important. I think it's really going to take us, drive us forward. It is capitalized with £15 billion, which sounds like a lot, but it's not really scratching the surface of the scale of the challenge, as I think your question alluded to. And so, the question for the bank is how can it use that money as wisely as possible? So we want to see it absolutely crowding in the private capital rather than crowding out. There sometimes can be a tendency for these sort of public or quasi-public institutions to crowd out private capital. We absolutely want it to have the opposite mandate. And on some levels, it's about looking at the areas of the economy that the private capital, private sector is not quite reaching. And a good example is where the Green Investment Bank that we had before, got sold off, and now we're creating a new one fundamentally, because it is a good idea. It did work. And what the Green Investment Bank did is they said, well, where are the areas that could be very impactful, the private market is not currently able to reach? They chose offshore wind. And what they did is they said, okay, how can we kickstart this industry? And now, of course, the UK is one of the world leaders in offshore wind. There are billions and billions of pounds of investment going into the North Sea in particular to put these enormous wind turbines in the sea, and that is helping drive our net zero power sector. So what the National Infrastructure Bank needs to consider is, what are the infrastructure needs? What are the ones that the private market is not able to reach? How can the bank use some of its capital, ideally not all of it, to kickstart private investment into these areas? And then how can that, on some levels, how can they assess when that bit of the industry is done, I suppose, effectively, in terms of that there is no longer a need for the National Infrastructure Bank to engage. So they then move on to the next hard thing. And that's actually a really big challenge philosophically for an institution. As soon as it starts being really successful, it needs to stop what it's doing and move on to something else. And I think it's all up to all of us to be helping and supporting and guiding and monitoring that bank to make sure that it's doing that. One other thing I'll say about the Infrastructure Bank is that, there is a danger that this levelling up mandate and this net zero mandate almost make two separate institutions doing two separate things. We think that would be a problem because actually those two things are joined together by this concept of the just transition, which is about thinking about how do we make sure that the drive to a net zero economy, the economy we're moving to in the future, doesn't put huge numbers of people, particularly people whose jobs and livelihoods and communities depend in large part on some of the polluting industries. How do we make sure that they have a fair shot in and aren't too disadvantaged in the future? And that's really important for the government actually maintaining this political momentum to be able to act on climate change. And so we think the just transition is the glue that joins together net zero with the levelling up agenda, and the bank could really focus on those two things as a combined approach and start creating some really exciting opportunities, particularly in the North of England.
And to Sab and Adam, the public-private partnership, which was used to good effect to redevelop much of the UK city centres, is that how you would see it working in terms of the National Infrastructure Bank with government money being equaled or exceeded by private investment, or do you see this as being a particularly public investment?
I don't mind coming in on this actually while you're thinking about it, Seb and Adam, because fundamentally government funding should be used where there's a market failure and to really leverage private investment. And so for me, that's what the National Infrastructure Bank should be about. It should be about, like James said, using the opportunities that government uniquely has in terms of its ability to look at risk differently to the rest of the market at the moment to kickstart and leverage some of these investments. And as the market becomes more comfortable and it becomes more of the norm, then it's done its job. And really you'd expect the private investors to take over. And at the moment you'd hope that it will be a really good mix because the market is very buoyant and very excited about the opportunity for investing in this kind of sector. But it is a different risk profile, and I think the NIB is going to have a really good role there. And the other thing that I think is really interesting about the National Infrastructure Bank is fundamentally if it's there to finance infrastructure, there's a general threat on infrastructure of the climate change issue. So it's in its own interest to really stimulate this market, because otherwise it's just going to there's going to be a growing list of things around flood defences, around public transport resilience, power resilience. All of that is going to increase, and building the market in sustainable and green finance is absolutely critical to offset that.
I'll just add as well. So again, the experience we have as infrastructure investors or kind of microfinance investors for financial inclusion in a lot of the emerging market economies, we see lots of input and catalytic investment and support from the multilaterals and the development banks, and it's that initial piece that brings in the private investors and albeit the public ones as well, but to really drive and fund those schemes. And then after a certain period of time, of course, those institutions will step out and leave it in the private hands to continue the good work. So yeah, the model kind of exists in a lot of the developing market economies already. So I agree with what you said. So definitely a big part to play.
Seb, do you have anything to add about the National Infrastructure Bank?
Not really, no. It's not something that we are likely to get very involved with, to be honest.
Yeah. Can I add one thing, building on what Zoe said, which is about the kind of project preparation piece? And I've done a lot of work in previous roles working with local authorities across the world on structuring transactions, and one of the challenges has always been that there's this kind of gap where the project, particularly public sector backed projects at subnational level, which obviously is a huge number of things when you think about all the cities of the world and the other subnational entities, they get to the point of saying, well, we've taken this as far as we can, and we think it's a good project, but nobody's coming to invest in it. And on the other side, you get investors saying, well, we've got actually money we want to invest in these projects, but no one's bringing us a project we can invest in. And there's a need to bridge that gap and to get the transactions to the point where they can be investment ready or finance ready. And I think that the National Infrastructure Bank could actually play a very useful function in that regard of project prep, as well as the actual financing that they provide. So it'd be great to see how that's being resourced to allow that, because it's not cheap, but it is very impactful. And I think that would be a very useful use of the Infrastructure Bank's time.
Thank you, James. Moving on to green taxonomy. There's going to be a wide range of views on this, both for good and ill. Zoe, as a Deloitte operative, what would your view on some idea of a green taxonomy, and how would it work?
I think as the discussions touched on before, green taxonomy is fundamental to trust in the sector. And Deloitte's no stranger to regulation and all that comes with that. But trust is important across financial and sort of big industry generally. And I think unless there's a global taxonomy that can be applied, there's going to be an increasing issue just sort of growing in this sector that's going to affect investment as well as the general consumer. So I mean, we thought it was quite interesting how we did some research back in 2020 just on kind of how consumers take decisions and ethical credentials and what the impact of ethical credentials makes. And so what we found that 34% of consumers are taking ethical credentials into account in their sort of day-to-day decisions, and something like 43% already specifically choose brands due to their environmental values. So actually being really clear what those environmental values and what those ethical credentials are is going to become more and more important, because consumers, it's not just finance, it's all consumers across all sectors, are going to really start to trust some of this to make their decisions. And I think that's critical to the market, and it has to be consistent across sectors and across the globe.
Trust is going to be the big thing, so it doesn't turn out like the Erst tax in Germany. Well,
absolutely. I don't think it was James who maybe mentioned, is it the marketing department that's writing some of the scripts and the material around some of the funds, or is it is this actually scientific basis and an agreed method demonstrating green credentials? And I think that's critically important.
James. Sorry, Adam.
No, sorry, it's me, it's Seb. In the spirit of wanting to create a bit of a debate, I mean, can I say something? I think I'm not sure whether we should be, well, I am sure that we shouldn't be relying on people to integrate ethical considerations into their investment decisions. I think it's wonderful that people do. But we've been around this story for 2 decades, and I'm just not sure we can rely on it. If you look at the sectors that have really moved, power and now increasingly cars, it's been driven by regulation. And people don't talk about, when you're talking about investing in the electric vehicle value chain or the internal combustion engine vehicle value chain, they don't talk about it as being an ethical decision. It's just like, well, that's where the future is. Of course, you're going to be investing in electric vehicles, and that's where the market really has power. No sell-side analyst in the market is talking about internal combustion engines as a viable technology for them, over the next 10, 20 years, because the market has moved wholesale into electric, mostly battery, some fuel cell, mostly battery electric vehicle. That's not because of an ethical decision. It's because the market has been pushed that way by regulation. And I think if we continue to rely on individuals making ethical decisions, it's not going to happen on the scale that it has to happen. So the taxonomy, I think, is an inadequate tool for driving the market. What we need is changes in regulations that, we ban the internal combustion engine by 2030. That's making the market move. We're going to ban heat pump, gas-fired boilers by 2035. That should come sooner. That will make the market move. We can't rely on individuals making, ethical decisions to make the market move.
James, something you.
I was just going to jump in, actually.
Sorry.
I agree with you. I agree with you on that, Seb. And I think the green taxonomy is a good start, but it is so nuanced. And if you look at what's already happened in the EU, in the EU taxonomy, they're ahead of us on that point. And it's interesting because all of our funds are around driving a positive impact. So we have very clear criteria, the same as the guys and Seb at Web do, to make sure that we're not having a negative impact on anything. And when you look at what's in the EU taxonomy as an example, because it's extremely environmental and, let's say, kind of climate driven, anything to do with social issues that are being addressed by the investments and the funds is kind of actually overlooked at this moment in time and outside of the scope. So again, it really does need something in addition to this. I think a taxonomy will help the end investor, the retail clients, perhaps see something more clearly, more transparently. But again, it still needs a lot more work and a lot more detail to provide that surety for the end investors as well.
I think this is an interesting discussion. I think it's very fair to these comments and criticism, but I think what we mustn't forget is the taxonomy isn't the Swiss Army knife. It's not trying to do 16 different things. It's one tool in what needs to be a very full toolbox that allows us to drive forward the whole industry. And I think, Seb, your point is very important, that we can play around with regulations in various ways, and they will do some things. We have, as a financial service industry, various levers we can pull that can make change in the wider economy and wider society. Stewardship is one of them. Where we choose to invest and lend is another. And there are, these are kind of almost approaches that can help drive investment into various other ways. But actually, if you want to know where the biggest levers are, well, clearly they lie with government. And so the government is in a position to be able to say, like you suggested, or like you commented, ban petrol, diesel-powered vehicles, ban gas boilers. These things are things that government can just do. Government perhaps could also put in place a carbon tax or some sort of carbon pricing mechanism. And I think that is going to probably be where we're going to have to end up globally. We're already seeing some countries starting to think about this. We have a degree of a carbon pricing mechanism with the trading scheme that we have in the UK and elsewhere in Europe, but I think it needs to be far broader in its coverage. And so, I think what the point I'm trying to make is, the green taxonomy is one part of what needs to be a much greater piece of or set of different tools and regulations and approaches that are targeted at helping everyone and every company and everybody approach this from their different perspectives, viewpoints, with their different hats on, whether that's their work hat or their personal life, and start being kind of pushed more towards a sustainable approach rather than anticipating this might happen voluntarily. And I think, that's one of the key things. The taxonomy, so I declare a bit of an interest. I'm part of the government's technical advisory group for the green taxonomy. And so, we are looking at how the taxonomy is structured, how it connects to the EU. The Green Finance Roadmap that was published by the government recently does give some more indications of this. Now, of course, we want to make sure that this is as simple as possible to implement and that it's as impactful as possible. And there is a problem at the moment that the green taxonomy, certainly as the way the EU has crafted it, covers a very small segment of the economy. I think it's about 5% of the economy. Now, one would assume that over time, as we get closer to being actually net zero, that proportion of the economy increases. But nevertheless, we are where we are right now. And so we think that there's a need to start considering, well, what are the transitional activities, things that aren't the actual net zero outcome, but that are on the road to it. The kind of example you might give is that the Prius or the hybrid car was a precursor to the electric cars that we're now seeing on the road. So and at some point you have to stop saying that a hybrid is green and you have to start saying that an electric vehicle is green. There's the same is true in very many other industries and sectors: concrete, steelmaking, aviation. Now, some of those sectors need to reduce in terms of their overall scale. Other sectors need to transition and start manufacturing or creating these products and services in greener ways. And so the taxonomy, in our view, needs to, as UKCIF, needs to recognize that there are, it's not a binary thing. Either it's green or it's everything else. There are shades of green in this discussion. And so if you can't find an investment opportunity in the kind of super green end that is compatible with net zero, then what are the next best things available? And how does the taxonomy guide you in that direction? And that will all then link through to the reporting approaches. The UK is calling it the SDR, Sustainable Disclosure Regulations, which is linked, which is drawn from, but perhaps not completely linked to, which is one of the other challenges we're looking at, the European SFDR. And so these are fundamentally about disclosure regulations and approaches to what extent are you aligned with the green taxonomy? To what extent are you disclosing your climate-related risks through TCFD? And so there is I think this is one of the key questions. There's a disclosure piece, there's a kind of analysis piece, but then there's also what is actually going to make the change in the real economy. Investors and financiers can play a big role in that, but government has much bigger levers, really.
It all comes back as well to what Zoe was saying about trust. And of course, a big part of the trust will come from the governance and how the green investment is actually measured, and a form of how a rule book, if you like, in terms of what constitutes a green investment. Zoe, have Deloitte given much thought to this?
I think yes, and it's a really challenging area of thinking, really, because there's perhaps a more straightforward way of measuring where there's a direct investment in carbon related projects or products. So that's there are scientific ways of measuring some of the outcomes in that space, but when it comes to sort of corporate lending or more general investment, how do you report what the green credentials are? And that's really a minefield that we've seen across ESG generally. Social value reporting has been an issue for a number of years, but there hasn't been consensus. And for Deloitte, I think we're seeing that there isn't really enough emerging in terms of standardized approach, and that's one of the biggest challenges of this market, is how to identify something, again, like you said, Alistair, something that's trusted and can come through as a something that can be adopted by the whole industry that's impacted by this.
And should that governance be at a global or a UK level, James?
I mean, we are in a global environment. We are the decisions and things that happen in one place impact the environment for everybody. We're also in a global financial environment where investors and financiers are operating internationally, selling products and investing internationally. That said, we also have to recognize pragmatically that there are countries in the world and that different countries do different things. I think one of the most exciting developments potentially over the recent months has been the IFRS Foundation creating its Sustainability Standards Board, and that we hope will set this kind of global baseline of approaches to regulation. We know the UK is very much involved in that and is very keen to align with what that comes out with. What we hope it doesn't do is create this kind of lowest common denominator, but it actually goes a bit beyond that, and it's quite forward thinking and quite engaged. So there is a huge need for global alignment, and the sort of thing that we think is, of course there's a global competition for innovation, for skills, for headquarters, for companies, but should there be a global race for standards and definitions of what is and isn't green and what is and isn't good practice? And actually the more that we can collaborate on that, I think the better, as long as, again, it's not just finding this lowest common denominator, but it is actually aligned to the scale of the challenge we face. And so I think the COP presents an opportunity for the UK government to drive forward some leadership in this space, to start engaging with other countries and say, look guys, we need to actually work together here. This is clearly an area for international cooperation, and start seeing where we can harmonize and where we can align if possible, but of course recognizing that that is not an easy thing to do, and that therefore if we want to be acting at the level of change or the pace of change that's required to hit net zero, we might have to go ahead of where some other countries are at, and in the meantime encourage those countries to catch up, perhaps.
Seb, in terms of as an investor, I guess it's about outcomes, and from the outcomes there's a kind of set of rules in terms of the green investment. What kind of thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I just worry a little bit. I mean, of course, it's both and. We need all these things, but the UK government has recently talked about shifting the green surcharges you pay on your electricity bill, shifting that onto your gas bill. And I think in terms of delivering outcomes, that's a much more impactful policy than any number of green taxonomies. And it's that kind of change, real economy change, that will drive investment. And this idea of labeling something green when you don't have the underlying industrial policy to support it, it's just not going to work. And I have other problems with the tax. I mean, we were talking about it this morning. There's a big section in the EU taxonomy on concentrated solar power, which is the one with the mirrors. I don't know if you can picture the ones with the sort of mirrors that concentrate the power onto the tower. No one does that anymore because it's not economic. And yet the whole kind of section was written about it in the taxonomy. I mean, the taxonomy was written 2 years ago. It's kind of a bit out of date now. And kind of in a way we should expect that and welcome it, because we need a very dynamic, this needs to be dynamic, lots of innovation, lots of change. And a taxonomy that's 700 pages long. And I mean, who knows how it's going to get updated. And it's just one taxonomy. They're going to plan another 4 on the environmental side. I mean, it's just it's a bit of a nightmare. And actually, all we want to see is changes in industrial policy that facilitate and really kind of release the power of the market. And I worry that these green rule books are at best a distraction, and at worst a kind of brake. They serve as a brake on innovation in the real economy. So yeah, I think it's a worry anyway.
I think your point around the pace of change is really important, Seb, because we know that government and regulation doesn't happen quickly. I think one of the things that we would really like to see is much more connectivity between the scientific, the science community and the finance community, because I think things need to be done at pace, and and sort of reflect current thinking, and it changes so much that unless we've got much better connection with science and the latest technology and all of those things, then we're always going to be a step behind and never going to achieve the outcomes that we're looking for. So that was one of my sort of key takeaways, is a much better link between that scientific community in the space and the markets.
Yeah, and we have 10 years, don't we? We have 10 years to sort this out. I mean, I would be impressed if the EU manages to produce a second version of their taxonomy in 10 years, and we don't have long to do it. So, you know, I don't mean to particularly pick on the EU taxonomy, because obviously, you know, it does have some value, but it attracts so much attention and energy, and really we need these other changes in the economy to really drive change.
And I think, you know, one of the things Seb is perhaps suggesting is that we need more sort of principles-based regulation rather than rules. And I think this perhaps is an opportunity that we have in the UK to start thinking about this as we're developing some of our own regulatory sets, is, you know, thinking more along the lines of, rather than, you know, being on this sort of, you know, particularly the EU regulations typically tend to be, and this makes sense because they're trying to get them enacted across 27 different countries. That must be very challenging. But you end up being kind of on a railway track, and you just can't move off of that railway track. You're just kind of going to wherever those destinations go. You know, in the UK, we potentially have the chance to say, okay, this is what we're trying to achieve. But it's not necessarily in the regulator's gift to figure out the best way for you to achieve that. In fact, that's the joy and beauty of the market, is that you know, figuring out the most innovative and you know, potential avenues to get to those places is something the market is very, very good at. So how do we figure out ways to use that innovation and skills of the market to you know, hit the targets we want to do without, but the crucial thing is making sure that there's not that greenwash in there that says, oh yeah, of course we're aiming towards that. And so what are the checks and balances that determine whether we are actually getting there rather than just saying we're getting there? And I think that if we can figure out the answer to some of those puzzles, we can really kind of get the market moving forwards and get some amazing innovation happening here.
Yeah, completely agree.
Adam, you know, this must be an area that Triodos have wrestled with over the last 40 years in terms of your own investments and way of doing business. What kind of insight can you give us on that in terms of the government?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, Alistair, I'm echoing the thoughts of Seb and James here. There's, you know, it is something that we've struggled with the whole time, and it can't just be one thing in isolation. You're right, there are more and more organisations out there that are, you know, effectively kind of making noise in this sector and greenwashing, and they're creating awareness of what's going on, but they're also, you know, tarring a lot of genuine organizations with a similar brush. I think what we really need to be doing is looking at this combination approach and using some form of regulation to actually not only try and highlight those that are sustainable, but actually call out those that are not sustainable and show that the impact that that's having, so that it creates awareness from that side of things as well. And I think, you know, any regulation that is developed or put in place, that James is alluding to, that we might have control of here in the UK, it needs to be forward looking. We can't keep looking backwards on things. And it's the same when we look to you know, as Seb will agree, I'm sure, when you start looking at measuring impacts and sustainability, lots of the ways that this is actually calculated is backward looking. And it's not helpful at this moment in time. So everything really needs to be forward looking. And I think those forward looking ambitions will drive the markets and, you know, and help clients to judge the intended effects of the investments and the solutions that are available as well.
We've heard that Vladimir Putin is not going to be attending COP26, and it's looking likely that President Xi will not attend as well. So when it comes to reporting, we could have both those countries have you know, a declared interest in a greening economy. Is there a danger that we have multiple standards across the globe, and what can be done in terms of reporting, or should the UK simply plough its own furrow? James?
Yeah, I think there is a reality that we're gonna diverge further on standards before we realize that this is madness and start coming back together. And I think that that is going to be very, very tricky. It's something we're warning about. It's something we're talking to government about, and I think every government has their own often political reasons for why they want to do something in a slightly different way to other people. And yeah, I think, you know, we do need to be calling this out and you know, as investors coming together and saying, right, how do we get the governments of the world to start seeing this as the problem that it is, and bringing, you know, that conversation together and people together. So yeah, I think we as investors, as financiers, we should be prepared for more regulatory divergence. That's going to be very unpleasant for a lot of people. It's going to hold back the, you know, so it's not just going to be unpleasant and difficult, it's actually going to hold things back. It's going to hold back the power of financial services to be a really key force in this transition globally to a sustainable future. You know, I think speaking to UK CIF members, you know, everybody's doing the best they can, but everybody's finding it hard. You know, I think what we need to find is a situation where all of these amazing ESG teams that are employed in the financial services industry, how can we make sure that they're, you know, obviously they are spending time reporting, and there's a role for reporting, but how can we make sure that that's as streamlined as possible so they spend most of their time strategizing and figuring out the future, engaging with management, engaging with the product teams, to really put each of those companies in the right place. And I think that's got to be one of the priorities to consider. But like I say, we're some way off that. Maybe COP26 can be a starting point to think about that regulatory convergence.
Zoe, do you have thoughts on this, given that Deloitte are operating across multiple countries and are likely to be working within multiple rule books?
Yeah, like James said, it's going to be a challenge for anyone in this space, with different rule books applying. But coming back to your question about whether the UK should plough its own furrow, I think inevitably someone needs to lead the market, and it's a great opportunity for the UK to just get on and do what's right and try and head in the right direction. And the more world leaders that and you know, world leading countries that do that, the better, because at some point, you know, we'd hope to stem the flow of those that don't necessarily have the same approaches and ambitions.
Seb, would you like to add anything to the reporting?
No, you know, we recognise those challenges as well, and it is, you know, it's painful to have to complete all these different data requirements from the different regulatory regimes. But yeah, I hope we can bring the threads together sooner rather than later. Maybe the international IFRS standards can be an opportunity to try and begin to do that.
That concludes the questions that we have in front of us. This is the kind of first, if you like, of a number of green finance forums that we'll be running. So therefore, it's a kind of an opportunity for the panelists to get their own views in terms of or areas that hasn't been covered that you think should have been. So if I could just get from each of you, you know, any areas that you would any comment that you would like to add that hasn't been included within the questions that we posed today, starting with yourself, Seb.
Well, I think you know, I think maybe I'm not sure what structure you have in mind, but you know, the way that I think about this is really kind of what are the sectors of the economy that are responsible for generating the greenhouse gases that are the problems, and what's happening in those sectors to help address those, to reduce emissions. And I think that sort of sector-based approach is really interesting, because then you can get into the real detail of this. You know, what is happening technology-wise? What's happening from a regulatory point of view? How is finance helping to accelerate the change? When you talk at the level of the green economy, there's so many different parts to it. It's quite difficult to get really into the meat of it. If you talk about power and transport and agriculture and food, you know, then you can really. And I think it is tremendously exciting, because there is so much new technology coming through.
You're absolutely right. We're intending to follow the kind of government's kind of 10-point plan, which is very much sector focused. And
yeah,
I think
great.
Right, it completely makes sense because each are wrestling with different aspects of what it means.
Yeah,
thank you.
Very good.
Anything you would like to add? By the way, Sep, I'm admiring that painting on above your shoulders. Is that Damien Hirst?
No, it isn't. But it's a message from Greta, actually, Greta Thunberg. It's a painting that I very much liked, and it's got a quote from Greta on it. It sort of inspires me every day.
Thank you. Sorry, that was an interlude. Sorry, I interrupted.
That's great. I'm afraid I don't have anything fun behind me at the moment. Something. I think there's a couple of things. One, the role of the retail investor, and there's been a lot of talk recently that retail investors can have huge impact by changing where their money is invested. But actually, I think there's then a huge knowledge gap of, well, how do you actually do that? What are the barriers? There's a massive range of barriers from saying to somebody, you can change where your pension is invested and therefore have huge global impact, and then actually achieving that. And so I think that's a piece that could be explored, and obviously Good Money Week is all about that. And then the other piece is on stewardship, investor stewardship, and we strongly believe that there remains a sort of big lobby sort of talking about divestment as being the principal thing. So why is our pension fund invested in X, Y, Z? We think they're not sustainable. We need to get out. When actually, we think one of the biggest ways that we as investors can have impact is by engaging with the management of those companies that we have shareholdings in, and pushing them to do things in a different way. And that is how you move the real economy into being more sustainable. It's also macroeconomically important in terms of, for the UK economy, perhaps, in terms of taking the businesses that are based here and making them fit for purpose for a sustainable future. And so I think there is a big piece to explore there around how investors can really positively impact the companies they have shares in, but also how do we build public confidence that investor stewardship is real, it's impactful, it's outcome-based, rather than there being a bit of a cozy club between investment managers and the companies they're invested in.
Thanks, James. Adam, anything you would like to add that you don't feel has been covered in today's session?
No, to be honest, I was going to go for the two that have been mentioned now. I think the retail client piece is important, and I like the sectoral suggestion from Seb as well. So no, I'm happy. Cool.
Zoe?
Yeah, and again, I think we've covered a lot there today. My interest in particular lies in sort of the real estate and development, because there's a massive role to play in that sector in particular, in terms of financing development and what green development looks like, and how the planning process needs to be fundamentally rethought. And I think local government, central government, there's just so much to do there to unpack that particular sector, and it has a massive impact on the carbon footprint of the UK, so and globally. So yeah, for me, there's a lot in that.
That concludes today's session. Thank you all so much for attending. This is very much a journey, and I'm sure we will all see each other again talking about an entirely different topic. But thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Alistair.
Thanks, Jane.
You.
Thank you, Zoe. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Adam.